Hello, students. So we are going to look today at what it takes to run for president. This covers the campaigning and nominations portion of the syllabus and ties in very nicely with the next unit of study, which is the presidency. So we're going to compare the elections of 1920 and 2020. There are a few more similarities than you might think. If you know about the election of 1920, and it's okay if you don't, because we're going to learn. That's what we're here to do. So we're looking at a lot of primary source documents, a lot of primary source photos, things like that. This is our first one. Some photographer got this, the crowd outside the White House on election night in 1920 to all pretty much, I see some people in the back who aren't, but to all pretty much turn around and look at him or her taking this very serene photograph. Doesn't look like anything much is going on. They're just waiting to hear the news. So what are we going to do? We're going to learn the history of the 1920 presidential campaign and elections. We're going to brush up on the events of the 2020 presidential campaign and election. We're going to learn what it takes to run for the office of the president today, and apply that information to the next unit of study on the presidency. We'll learn about campaigning and presidential elections, and we will track the evolution of presidential campaigning and elections using the 1920 and 2020 election. A lot of things have changed in 100 years, but so much has stayed the same, and we'll look at that a little later on. So just to start out with, if you're unfamiliar with the election of 1920, that's fine. You know, to tell you the truth, I was too, before researching and writing this unit. Again, this I should have stated just at the jump that this unit is me. I thought this was just a creative way to do campaigning and elections. So this is not in your textbook. This is me. So we're going to take a look at the history of this election, and we're going to understand what took place before we dive into campaigning. So I'm going to give you the history now, so you're caught up and understand what happened 100 and now 1 years ago, 101 years ago. So we had, as the major party candidates, President Harding, and what would be President Coolidge. And I didn't actually know this until I looked at this unit, that FDR was the vice presidential candidate in this election, along with Governor Cox. So 3 presidents and a governor here in this election. So the 1920 election really was very largely a referendum on the policies of Woodrow Wilson, pictured there. He was very much a progressive figure, a very liberal in his outlook. I don't mean Democratic Party, I mean just liberal, as we discussed in our previous unit on political theory. But he enacted a whole bunch of policies that weren't really popular with the American people any longer. The American people had had war fatigue. They were tired of keeping the world, loosely speaking, in line. But he had broken his promise to keep us out of the First World War. He didn't involve Congress in negotiating the Treaty of Versailles, which they should have been. He refused to compromise with the Republicans on the League of Nations, the League of Nations being the precursor to the United Nations. They're supposed to do the same thing. So a lot of broken promises. This was before presidential term limits were enacted, so Wilson could have run for a third term, and he was kind of hoping to at least get the nomination from his party to do so. But this was if you're familiar with presidential history, this was the guy who he had the stroke while in office, and his wife wasn't running the show in the shadows for a little bit. That's just an interesting tidbit. That's neither here nor there. So this is a postcard, I believe, from the Republican National Convention. Very patriotic, very orderly. Again, how they got all these people to look at the camera is something that surprises me. I don't know that if we went to a political party convention and asked a bunch of people to look at us like this, we'd get this sort of reaction. So it's amusing, informative, and indicative of the times, looking at these primary source materials. So the Republican Party should be a party, not part. I don't know why. Always miss something when editing. Put forward just a bevy, which means a whole lot of candidates to try to take on the Democrats in this election. There was General Leonard Wood. I don't expect you to remember these names. Governor Frank Loudon of Illinois. Hiram Johnson, senator from California. But none of the candidates here emerged with anything close to enough delegates to win the Republican nomination outright. And the Republican Party had to wait until the convention defined a candidate. So the primaries failed to produce a clear winner. The party bosses couldn't decide, so they said, let's just wait until the convention. So they waited until the convention. The convention was held in early June of 1919, and women had finally gotten the right to vote. And here we see a bunch of suffragettes outside the Republican National Convention. Again, it was the first election in which women could vote. And after several rounds of voting, these delegates to the convention, they still couldn't decide on a candidate. It was a deadlock. No one was pulling ahead. So eyes started turning to then Senator Warren Harding. Nobody was really thrilled with the idea of Harding as the Republican nominee. He was a compromise candidate, meaning that, he wasn't anybody's first choice, but he was somebody that everybody could agree on, that nobody was going to, fight about. So Harry Doherty, pictured on the screen, he was an Ohio political insider and a friend of Harding's, began to promote Harding for the nomination because he looked like a president. And take it from me, folks have been nominated for and elected to office for a lot less than that, for looking like they could be a president or a governor or a senator or whatever it is. But, Doherty would go on to become Harding's attorney general, so he was rewarded for his service to the cause. So Doherty said, and this is then Senator Harding, he said, "I don't expect Senator Harding to be nominated on the first, second, or third ballots, but I think we can afford to take chances that about 11 minutes after 2, Friday morning of the convention, when 15 or 12 weary men are sitting around a table, someone will say, 'Who will we nominate?' At that decisive time, the senatorial friends of Harding will suggest him, and we can well afford to abide by the result." And this was a very prescient statement. This was almost to the T what happened, what ended up happening. At the Blackstone Hotel, and it's still extant. This is what it looks like today. In a smoke-filled room, quite literally, On Friday, he called it. At the Blackstone Hotel. They decided that Senator Warren Harding of Ohio was going to be the compromise candidate. So Harding won the nomination after his name was put forward. Everybody was tired. I'm sure everybody wanted to get out of there, wanted to be over, wanted a candidate. So Harding won that nomination. And Calvin Coolidge, who would later go on to become president, as I said, in his own right, won the Republicans' vice presidential nomination. But his wasn't easy. Wasn't an easy road either. He faced a challenger. But we'll get to that a little later. So, Cox and Roosevelt. So the Democrats were also in a really very uncertain position. President Wilson had not named a successor, had not pointed to a guy and said, this is who you're going to run after me. He had hoped to win the nomination a third time himself, and he might have done. I mean, who's to say, really? But he was, at that point, so unhealthy and just very sickly, having suffered that stroke. He wasn't up to it at that point, and I think he knew that too. I don't know. Power is a hard thing to give up. Power is an aphrodisiac, certainly. So he didn't, obviously he didn't win the nomination. But the Democrats held their convention in San Francisco in late June, early July. They selected Governor Cox of Ohio, and then Assistant Navy Secretary Franklin D. Roosevelt as their ticket. There's their campaign button. So Cox, Roosevelt, Harding, Coolidge. That was what we were looking at in 1920. So Harding, as you can see here, and this is probably the very last time that something like this was happening in this country as a means of campaigning. Harding literally ran his campaign from the front porch of his house. He's standing at the front porch of his house. So you can see, I'm sure there are others. It looks like there's a police officer here. I'm not sure. The hat leads me to believe that might be a soldier or another police officer, or it very well could be a suffragette. I can't quite make it out. If anybody can, email me. But he called for a return to normalcy. That was his big thing. We had been fighting in World War I, League of Nations, all that stuff. Let's get back to normalcy. Let's get back to America first. So we'll discuss this later when we get to campaigning. But the Republican ticket advocated for lower taxes, limited immigration. They rejected the League of Nations, membership in the League of Nations. They were very critical of the war effort and peace negotiations. So the Democratic ticket really didn't do themselves any favors. They stuck with the party line and went about the country promoting the League of Nations, endorsing it, and a lot of other progressive causes, which led to their downfall because they were just very out of touch with the American electorate of 1919, 1920. Just very, very, very out of touch. And they lost big, Governor Cox and Secretary Roosevelt. And we had these train stop campaigns, these whistle stop campaigns, I think they were called. This is Eleanor Roosevelt. Here, Louis Howell, Stanley Presnell during the 1920 campaign. So again, they lost big. 60.3% of the vote went to Senator Harding, and 34.1% went to Governor Cox. And that is the widest popular vote differential in American presidential electoral history. And the Electoral College. Cox took a beating there as well, 404 votes to 127 for him and Roosevelt. So the Republicans took this as a great sign to reverse Wilson's progressive policies, reverse what the Democrats were doing, and kind of come home almost in a sense. And here we have a scene from President Harding's Inauguration Day, which you can see he's there. Wouldn't find this today. I'm not seeing any of the security measures. The Secret Service was around at this time. I'm not seeing any of the security measures. I see a few Marines, soldiers down here, but he looks pretty out in the open to me. So this is a side note. While researching, I was reading about this guy. I thought it was, I don't know, he amused me a little bit. The Socialist Party candidate, his name was Eugene Debs, and there he is. And he earned about 3.4% of all the votes cast, which worked out to about 897,000 votes. And interestingly, he was in prison at the time of the election. So he ran for president from his prison cell, which was what caught my interest in him. He criticized the government's handling of persons who were charged with violating the 1917 Espionage Act, and Debs was not even a citizen at the time of the election. The U.S. government revoked his citizenship in 1918 when he was convicted of sedition, which is something you don't want to be convicted of. So his citizenship was posthumously, meaning after he died, restored in 1976. So that's Eugene Debs. Now, in this unit, we'll be doing a lot of primary source activities. So if you're in my adult ed classes, don't worry about this. But if you're in online anytime, I'm going to end this video here at this point. This primary source activity 1 will be directly underneath where I place this video. And that assignment will be put on Flipgrid. So we're going to end this here, come back in a minute. This assignment will be right under this video. Put it on Flipgrid. I'll have the link and everything ready for you.